Okay, welcome back. We're still on page 74 talking about entropy. Now, if you were to take a Word document and say, how random is all the letters in this document? Are they going to be completely random? Like, not at all, right? There's going to be an awful lot of E's and a lot of T's, a lot of A's, right? But they're not going to be completely random. So if you were to do some statistical analysis on a document, you could even probably tell if it's English or French or German by just the distribution of the letters, because the letters are not random. Okay? Cool. Well, it's the same thing here in our world. We have bytes of information, so it's either going to be 0 all the way up to 255 for each byte in the application. So how random is this? Well, if I'm writing an application, I do not expect it to be random at all. I expect, this jump instruction is going to appear a heck of a lot more often than, this divide function, right? Because my application doesn't do any math, right? So I expect an awful lot of these and a few of those, so it's not at all random. But if it is random, that means this is not a real application. This is something that's either been encrypted or compressed, because encrypted files are random. Well, mostly. A heck of a lot more random than normal. And compressed files are the same thing. So here's a goofy little chart that basically talks about some researcher had done some stuff. Now, the 0 to 8 rating, let's don't go there. But so this is a file entropy number. So here's what happened is, if you have an entropy of whatever 4 is, then the likelihood of this thing being good. So apparently, a normal application would have an entropy of about 6.4. And so, if it came out where it's not random, then you're probably talking about this thing is not compressed. But if you get an entropy rating of 8, that means you're practically guaranteed that this has been encrypted. So here's their analysis of the entropy number and the percent of the samples that were good. So anything past 6.8, yeah, you're probably talking about something that's a virus. So even though you have figured out that how to trick the AV scanner, you've put a question mark in the AV scanner's mind about, I'm really leery about this. And that's all part of the game. AV scanning, and for that matter, you rarely get a definitive yes or no. You get a maybe. So, I'm making these numbers up, but let's just say, you did an entropy scan, and maybe even look at the entropy over the entire, what's the entropy of this section? One section at a time. And then you said, okay, yeah, you're probably bad. The point of all that does is just raise your suspicion level. In this case, if I had a 7, I'd go, okay, I'd rate my suspicion rate by 20%. If I had an 8, I go, okay, now we're 90%. There's something going on here. Okay, continuing. On page 76, they talk about polymorphism. Now, you may have heard this term before, particularly if you're a coder, because polymorphism is one of the fundamentals of object-oriented programming. And the whole idea is that, let's skip the discussion about what it is in the other world. In our world, polymorphism is about a mutation engine, something that goes in so that every time the application runs, it'll change itself. So the virus scanner might look at it and go, I'm kind of suspicious. But then as soon as you run the thing, it changes itself. So the antivirus software is going, well, I've never seen this guy before, but he looks a little suspicious. So it just keeps over and over and over and over and over, because you don't ever end up running the exact same code twice. Isn't that pretty cool? So it alters the code without changing its function. I mean, it's still malware. You're just changing little bits and pieces so that the signature of the thing moves. Anyway, the whole idea is escape detection, right? That kind of makes sense. So I have some sort of a virus, and I can have this thing multiple kinds of versions of this that all basically have one virus in memory. So if I'm trying to detect it on disk, I may miss one, right? Because every time you do it, it produces a new one. But as far as the code just runs. Okay, cool beans. Now, so metamorphism basically talks about mutating all the parts of the application, not just the encryption routine, right? All I have to do is change the encryption key, and the entropy will remain the same, but the being able to see it will not. And decrypting one of them won't solve the problem of decrypting the others. So metamorphism is basically the same concept, except instead of just sticking with this whole entropy thing, let's go ahead and just change the function of the malware, change the code around. Maybe it's something as simple as have one code block here, one code block here. Just move them. Okay, that's enough to change the signature of the file. So, pardon me. So here's how this would look. So they're still talking about decryption, but I'm talking about a lot more than that. More than just the encryption thing going on. You could be actually modifying pieces of the code. So one more time, every time it runs, it looks different. Okay, and in this case, whenever it runs, it's a different image inside memory. So anti-reversing on page 78. Now look, everything can be reverse engineered. Everything. It's just a matter of time, energy, and talent. Okay? That's just all there is to it. Everything can be decompiled. So the goal of the malware writer is to make this frustrating to you, so you say, oh man, I got better things to do. I'm out of here, dude. So it's designed to annoy you. And again, if it's ransomware, if I can delay the malware analyst by an hour before they come up with a cure for my malware, well, that probably means money to me. I'm probably making money. So they spend a lot of time trying to do this anti-reversing stuff. I talked about this term called obfuscation. And the idea is the source code, still compiles and runs, but it's absolutely meaningless. Normal source code, you could actually read it and go, oh, this function is called get display. And you go, well, that's probably getting something off the display. This one over here says, set display. And you go, oh, that's probably something to do with setting a display value. But after obfuscation, this is AB942, and this is QR7. And there's no explanation of what it is or how they're related, and you can't make heads or tails of it. You would have to literally go through and say, okay, what on earth is this thing doing? It's going to slow you down. That's the whole point. Okay, so Ultimate Packer for Executables, UPX. This is kind of an old program. We talked about this before. Back in the modem days, you would run UPX on an exe file to make it physically smaller so that you could send it over a slow modem link. And then once you got it, it stayed encrypted once you got it. And every time you ran the application, it would decompress it and then put the decompressed in memory. So the decompressed application never was on disk. It always just was in memory. Fantastic tool that the malware writers obviously co-opt and said, aha, we're going to use this because we can use this to our advantage. By the way, I rarely see UPX packed things these days. I mean, there's lots of packers, don't get me wrong. I just don't. I rarely see UPX. It's just getting kind of old. And then anti-decompiler, anti-disassembler. We're trying to break the tool. I'll tweak my application, maybe the header in the application, so much so when I fire up my super duper detection routine, it's going to look at the file and go, I don't see anything. I quit. It doesn't look like a Windows PE header style application. It looks like something from a Mac or a Linux box. So breaking the tool so that when you fire up IDA, let's say you got IDA Pro, and you say, how come I'm going to disassemble this guy? And IDA Pro says, I don't know what the heck this thing is. I quit. So breaking the tool. And then, of course, obfuscation, which means I can decompile it. Oh, yeah, I can decompile it. But after I get it, I can't make sense of it. Okay, cool. All right. So dynamic protection on page 79. So now we have basically 5 techniques. Anti-debugging. In other words, I see that you launched a debugger. Na. Or anti-sandboxing, or environmental lock, and all that stuff. So let's go through it. So on page 89, they talk. Is that 89 or 79? 79. They talk about attaching a debugger. So I'm a application software guy, and I know how to debug an application. So if I fire up my Visual Studio, I can say attach a debugger to Notepad. And when I launch Notepad, I'm going to be able to step through Notepad one line at a time, or set a breakpoint and go look at things. A really, really cool thing to do if you're into that kind of stuff. All right. So I really can't do a demo because I don't have the time and energy to do an IDA Pro thing here. But we have kind of sort of done that before when we went to the disassembler, when we used ILSpy, where we could actually see the software. Now, we are going to do a demo later where we're going to be able to step through the code, okay? But not right this very second. Okay, sandboxing. So the malware writers know the tools that you use. They know that you're putting this in a virtual environment, or maybe there's even an entire sandboxing tool that all the malware has to do while it's running. We're talking dynamic now, right? While it's running, is to say, aha, I see that we're inside a tool. I'm not going to do anything anything at all malicious. I'm just going to be normal application. So I detect that you're looking, and while you're looking, I'm going to be good. Isn't it just like a child? And so when you turn your head away, well, then it'll do bad things. But while you're looking, it's going to be perfectly good. Okay, so let's talk about this whole thing about the virtualized environments. The book basically talks about, if it's running under a virtual machine, it's likely that this is a malware. I mean, the malware says, I'm going to shut down. Well, to tell you the truth, maybe that was the case years ago, that when virtual machines were not all that popular. But right now, virtual machines are incredibly popular. I mean, for example, at the university, we only have like one or two physical servers, and all the rest of the servers are Hyper-V virtualized servers. And so from a malware writer's perspective, I don't want to give up 40% of my client base by saying, aha, I see virtualization, I'm going to stop. No. So we're talking about a specific type of virtualization used by these tools, the antivirus tools. Okay. So so here's basically how the sandboxing thing would start. So am I in a virtualized environment? No. Okay, well then, is there sandboxing tools in the system? I can check to see if you have stuff installed. Right, I'm running. I can do anything. No. Okay, well then I'm going to execute my application and go on about my business. Am I in a virtualized environment? Exit or do nothing, or exit and delete myself. Now, this is kind of cool. In other words, it's waiting for you to look the other way. As long as you have the sandbox in place, it'll never fire. But as soon as the sandbox goes away, it will. Isn't that pretty cool too? I like this. Okay, next let's talk about environmental lock. And again, we kind of mentioned this before when we talked about dependencies. So I want this virus to run only on the CEO's computer, his laptop. And I happen to know, for how means necessary, know what the machine name is. And so if I was to put that virus in here, it's going to basically go through the same little algorithm here, except instead of looking for am I virtualized, it's going to say am I, CEO laptop 4. And if the answer is yes, I deploy my malware. If not, it'll just delete itself. So it installs itself, runs, it says, oops, sorry, not my target, goes away. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark. You guys know how this works.